Seattle General's pediatric ward hums with the white noise of machines keeping children alive. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead like insects trapped in glass, casting everything in a pale institutional glow. Hannah Clarke moves through the corridors with the careful efficiency of someone who has learned to be invisible, her scrubs pressed sharp, her dark hair pulled back so tight it looks like armor. She doesn't rush. She doesn't hesitate. She simply moves from one room to the next with the kind of precision that comes from muscle memory deeper than conscious thought. It's 6:13 a.m. The shift change hasn't fully arrived. The ward exists in that strange liminal space where night nurses are still finishing their charts and day nurses are still brewing coffee, and Hannah uses those minutes to check on the kids who sleep better in the early dark. Room 312, Brandon, age 7, post-appendectomy, vital stable. Room 319, Maya, age 4, cystic fibrosis, O2 saturation climbing nicely. Room 325, Devon, age 9, recovering from a compound fracture of the left tibia, pain controlled. Her hands move with surgical precision, checking monitors, adjusting fall lines, writing notes in charts that will disappear into the hospital system like whispers into stone. She approaches room 347 as she does every shift, moving past the threshold with her eyes forward. Inside, Tyler Webb lies in his wheelchair beside the bed, his small frame still in sleep clothes, his father Colonel Marcus Webb asleep in the chair beside him. The colonel's jacket is draped over the headrest, a weathered green canvas with a faded patch on the shoulder. But it's his forearm that catches Hannah's attention for exactly 1.3 seconds. Black ink. Military stencil. A name tattooed there in brutal simplicity, Clarke. Hannah's jaw tightens fractionally. Her fingers press against the medication cart. She doesn't look at the colonel's face. She doesn't let her eyes linger. She simply continues down the hall to the next room, her heart rate steady, her breathing controlled, her expression blank as a field operative's on her first extraction. In the supply closet, she allows herself 3 deep breaths. The supply closet is 4 feet by 8 feet, lined with boxes of gloves and trauma shears and fur tubing. There's a faint smell of plastic and antiseptic. Hannah stands with her back against the metal shelving, her eyes closed, her hands resting on her thighs. 1 breath in through her nose. Hold for 4 counts. Out through her mouth. Again. Again. The breathing technique she learned in Kandahar comes back instantly, muscle memory from 17 years ago, from a night when she carried a wounded lieutenant through 12 miles of hostile terrain and he whispered her name into the darkness like a prayer. She runs her fingers over her own inner wrist, pushing up the long sleeve of her scrub top. The coordinates are there in matching black ink, 34 degrees north, 69 degrees east. The Hindu Kush. The place where everything changed. The place where Marcus Webb was still Lieutenant Webb and she was still captain, and neither of them knew that in another few years they'd both disappear into civilian life as if their military service had never happened at all. The fluorescent lights flicker overhead. The moment passes. Hannah checks her watch, 6:58 a.m., and returns to her rounds like she's returning from nothing at all. The morning progresses in the usual rhythm of a pediatric ward. Blood draws at 7:15. Medication rounds at 7:45. Vital sign checks at 8 o'clock. The other nurses arrive in clusters, their voices louder than necessary in the hallway, their laughter cutting off like someone killed the sound when Hannah walks past. She's used to this. She's been invisible for 17 years. One more day of silence doesn't change anything. But then Dr. Pierce arrives at 8:11 a.m., and the temperature of the ward shifts. He moves through the corridors like he owns them, his white coat perfectly tailored, his stethoscope draped like a medal across his shoulders. His eyes are the color of a stormy Atlantic, and they have a way of looking through people rather than at them. When he reaches room 334, where 7-year-old Sophie Torres lies recovering from acute viral myocarditis, Hannah is already there checking her full line. Sophie's breathing has been labored since 2 a.m. Her oxygen saturation has been hovering at 92%. Her crackles suggest developing pulmonary edema. Hannah has been monitoring her every 30 minutes, watching the incremental decline, and she's written a note suggesting a cardiology consult and a trial of low-dose diuretics before the fluid overload becomes critical. Dr. Pierce reads her note. His eyes flick to Hannah. His smile is a knife. We'll start her on supportive care, he says to the attending, a younger resident named Dr. Shah. Standard recovery protocol. No reason to escalate just yet. Dr. Pierce, Hannah says quietly. Her voice is calm. Professional. Deferential. Her lung sounds have deteriorated since midnight. Bilateral crackles, worse on the left. I'm concerned about. Concerned, he repeats, and the word lands like a stone. That's very concerned of you. The resident looks at his shoes. She's developing pulmonary edema, Hannah continues, and her voice doesn't waver, but her hands have stopped moving. Given her heart function, early intervention could prevent. I appreciate your observations, Pierce says. The condescension hangs in the air like humidity. But I think we can trust the actual medical professionals to make treatment decisions. Wouldn't you agree, Dr. Shah? Of course, Shah says immediately. Hannah closes Sophie's chart. She sets it on the bedside table. She doesn't argue. She doesn't insist. She simply stands there for a moment, her face perfectly neutral, her jaw working slightly as if she's grinding something down into smaller pieces. Then she moves toward the door. Oh, and Clarke. Pierce calls as she reaches the threshold. Sophie needs fresh ice in her pitcher. Room 334 has been her room all night, so you probably noticed, but could you grab that before the morning shift really gets going? It's a dismissal. It's a reinforcement. It's a reminder of her place in the hierarchy. Get the ice. You're the nurse. You do the tasks. The doctors make the decisions. Hannah nods. Of course, doctor. She can feel his eyes on her back as she walks toward the ice machine. She can feel the weight of his satisfaction. She doesn't let it show. The break room at 9:15 a.m. is supposed to be a sanctuary. 3 nurses sit at the small table with terrible coffee and worse muffins are Jennifer, who's been at Seattle General for 8 years, Michelle, who joined last year, and Carla, who seems to exist in a state of permanent exhaustion. Hannah moves to the refrigerator to grab the lunch she packed yesterday, grilled chicken, brown rice, the same meal she eats every day, the same meal she's eaten for 17 years because structure is control. The conversation dies the moment she enters. Not stops. Dies. Like someone pulled a plug. Jennifer glances at Michelle. Michelle's eyes find her muffin suddenly very interesting. Carla stares into her coffee as if it contains the secrets of the universe. Hannah opens the refrigerator. Cold air spills out, carrying the smell of cooling metal and leftovers. She reaches for her lunch container. The other nurse's silence has a texture to it, thick and tangible, the kind of silence that means someone said something about her not 2 minutes before she walked in. Or maybe something about Dr. Pierce and how he spoke to her in room 334. Or maybe, more likely, nothing about her at all, just the simple fact of her presence is enough to make everyone else uncomfortable. Morning, she says quietly, not looking at anyone. Just a word. Just an attempt. Oh, hey, Jennifer says, and her voice is too bright, overcompensating. Didn't see you there. Hannah doesn't respond. She closes the refrigerator. She moves toward the door. Hey, did you guys see the new resident? Michelle says quickly, probably trying to restart a conversation that Hannah's arrival killed. He seems. Hannah leaves before the sentence finishes. The supply closet again at 10:02 a.m. She wasn't planning on it, but her hands led her there. This is a weakness. She knows it. Hiding in a supply closet is exactly the kind of thing that the old Hannah, the captain, would never have tolerated. But the captain doesn't exist anymore. The captain is dead and buried under 17 years of deliberate obscurity, and Hannah Clarke is what remains, and Hannah Clarke apparently needs to press her back against cold metal shelving and breathe. She stands in the darkness with her eyes closed. One breath in. Hold. Out. The fluorescent lights don't reach into the back corner. For 30 seconds, she's not in Seattle General Hospital. She's not wearing scrubs or a name badge or the invisible weight of her own disappearance. She's just a woman in the dark, breathing, existing, waiting for the next moment when someone needs her, and she has to pretend that she's just a nurse. Her phone buzzes in her scrub pocket. A text message. From an unknown number. You still monitoring the kid in 347? Captain. Hannah's breath catches. Her eyes snap open. Her hand moves to the phone, and for a moment, just a moment, her fingers tremble as she looks at the screen. But trembling isn't allowed. Trembling is weakness. Trembling is the kind of thing that gets people killed. She types back with steady fingers, "Who is this?" The response comes instantly, "Someone who remembers. Pentagon called 3 hours ago. They know you're here. Stay ready." The phone goes dark. Hannah stands in the supply closet with her heart rate elevated and her mind running calculations. The Pentagon doesn't call for nurses. The Pentagon calls for operational assets. The Pentagon calls when cover stories are about to collapse, or when someone has realized who's been standing in their hospital the whole time, moving invisibly through the pediatric ward, carrying a secret that's 17 years old and supposedly sealed in files that don't exist. She slides the phone back into her pocket. She takes 3 more breaths. Then she opens the supply closet door and steps back into the fluorescent light of the ward. The morning continues. By 11:44 a.m., Sophie Torres's breathing is worse. Her O2 saturation has dropped to 89%. The crackles have become wheezes. Dr. Pierce has not ordered a cardiology consult. He has not prescribed diuretics. Hannah has checked on Sophie 8 times in the past 2 hours, and each time the child looks smaller in her bed, as if the fear of not being able to breathe is physically compressing her. Hannah writes another note. Persistent pulmonary edema. Recommend immediate cardiology evaluation. Sophie's condition may deteriorate rapidly without intervention. She places it in the chart. Dr. Pierce will read it around 1:13 p.m. during his rounds. He will ignore it. Hannah knows this the way she knows her own heartbeat. The bulletin board smelled like fresh toner and institutional humiliation. Hannah read her name in Dr. Pierce's architectural scrawl, each letter a deliberate knife stroke, Clarke, written warning, overstepping scope of practice. Unauthorized medical advice to physicians. A cluster of residents lingered nearby, pretending to check the schedule board, but their eyes kept drifting to the disciplinary notice like moths to a flame. Someone whispered. Hannah's jaw tightened, a fracture line appearing and disappearing in a single second. Then nothing. Her face became smooth as water, reflective, giving nothing back. She turned and walked to the nurse's station without another glance, her scrub shoes making soft kissing sounds against the linoleum. Her hands logged into the computer. Steady. Competent. A woman with nothing to hide and everything to protect. The tremor didn't come. It wouldn't come. Trembling was a luxury soldiers couldn't afford, and Hannah Clarke had learned long ago how to compartmentalize pain the way other people filed receipts. Room for 12 was where the Rodriguez family had set up their anxious vigil. The mother sat in a vinyl chair that squeaked every time she moved, the father standing by the window with his arms crossed, both of them watching their 8-year-old son like he might disappear if they stopped looking. The boy's chest rose and fell in shallow, labored increments. Hannah had taken care of pediatric patients in field hospitals outside Kandahar, children with shrapnel wounds and septic infections, and she recognized the sound of a child fighting to breathe. The left lung wasn't moving enough air. The oxygen saturation monitor read 91% and dropping. Dr. Pierce entered at shift change, his white coat tailored like armor, his stethoscope a badge of authority draped across his shoulders like a presidential sash. Hannah approached him quietly, her voice low enough that only he could hear. Doctor, his lung sounds are significantly diminished on the left side. I've been monitoring his oxygen curve for the last 4 hours. I think we should order a chest X-ray. Her phrasing was perfect, not a command, not even a suggestion, but a careful offering laid at the feet of the hierarchy. Pierce turned to her with the kind of theatrical patience reserved for children and subordinates. Nurse Clarke. His smile had teeth in it. When I need blankets fluffed or bedpans emptied, I'll let you know. The adults are talking now. He pivoted away from her with the grace of a man who had never been questioned, never been doubted, never once imagined that the quiet woman in blue scrubs might know something he didn't. Your son is progressing beautifully, he announced to the Rodriguez family, his voice suddenly warm, suddenly accessible. Absolutely textbook recovery. Hannah made her notation on the tablet, her assessment, the time, the vital signs, the clinical concern she'd voiced and been dismissed. Every detail documented. Every moment recorded. She fetched the blankets he hadn't requested, folded them with surgical precision, and placed them on the foot of the bed. The boy's mother thanked her quietly. His father didn't look at her at all. Hannah left the room with her spine straight and her hands empty. The supply closet was 3 corridors away, past the nursing station and the medication dispensary, tucked between the storage units like a secret. Hannah stepped inside and let the door click shut behind her. The fluorescent lights hummed their industrial song. Shelves of 4 bags and catheter kits and sterile gauze stretched out in perfect rows, everything in its place, everything organized. Everything except her. 3 deep breaths. In through the nose. Hold. Out through the mouth. Her hands, braced against the shelf, had held pressure on a femoral artery bleed while a Black Hawk helicopter circled overhead at Bagram. They had started for lines in the dark with only a headlamp and muscle memory. They had inserted chest tubes and performed needle decompression procedures that had saved lives. And now they were trembling because Dr. Pierce had called her just a nurse in front of a family whose child's oxygen was dropping. No. The tremor stopped. She released the shelf and walked back out. The break room was where the second strike landed. Hannah entered with her coffee at shift change, the mug warm in her hands, seeking the corner table where she usually reviewed the day's charts. 3 nurses, Stephanie, Lauren, and Marcus, were mid-conversation about the new pediatric protocols. The moment Hannah sat down, her badge clattered softly against the table. Stephanie's eyes flickered sideways. She stood without a word, gathered her half-full coffee cup, and walked toward the sink. Lauren followed within 3 seconds. Marcus took 5, as if trying to make it look unplanned, but the choreography was too precise. Too practiced. Hannah opened her tablet and began reading, her coffee cooling in her hands, her face a mask so carefully constructed that no one looking at her could have guessed whether she'd noticed or simply hadn't cared. The silence in the break room had weight. It pressed down like altitude, like pressure, like the kind of emptiness that follows a helicopter crash. She had survived worse. She would survive this. What they didn't know was that Captain Hannah Clarke had spent 9 months in a safe house in Islamabad, scrubbed from every military database, every medical credential, every trace of her existence as anything other than a civilian nurse in Atlanta. She had learned to disappear so thoroughly that even the ghosts had stopped looking for her. A little professional isolation was a small price for staying invisible. The afternoon shift brought its own small cruelties. 2 surgical residents ignored her when she flagged a potential medication interaction in the charts. A physician's assistant interrupted her mid-sentence during rounds, then acted surprised when she'd already finished her thought. By 3 o'clock, Hannah had been corrected, dismissed, and looked through by 6 different doctors. By 4 o'clock, she'd stopped expecting eye contact. The evening arrived like a held breath. Hannah sat in the staff lounge, her shift nearly complete, watching the sun drop below the city skyline through the reinforced windows. The glass was the color of old money. She thought about her daughter Emma, 6 years old, drawing pictures of rainbow families at school. She thought about the call she'd received from the elementary school yesterday afternoon, Mrs. Peterson asking if everything was all right at home, mentioning that someone from Hannah's workplace had called to verify the emergency contact information. No one had asked permission. No one had explained why. Pierce was making moves. Strategic moves. The kind that came from a man who decided you needed to be erased, not just humiliated. Her phone buzzed. A text from the unit manager, need to talk about some feedback from Dr. Pierce. Nothing serious. Just touching base. Hannah read it once and deleted it. In the supply closet 3 hours earlier, she had made a decision with the clarity that only comes from having survived actual wars. She would not defend herself. She would not explain herself. She would work, and she would watch, and she would wait for the moment when patience became the most dangerous weapon in the room. The thing Pierce didn't understand, the thing he could never understand, protected as he was by credential and institution, was that some people had learned to survive by becoming invisible. Some people had learned that the quietest voice in a room was often the one holding everyone else's lives in its hands. Some people had looked at death from close enough that institutional humiliation felt like a gentle breeze. Hannah gathered her things at the end of shift and walked out through the employee exit, her badge catching the late afternoon light, her shadow stretching behind her like a reminder that darkness was always closer than people wanted to admit. The employee exit door closed behind her with a pneumatic hiss, and Hannah emerged into the Atlanta afternoon where heat shimmer rose off the parking lot like invisible flames. Somewhere above the hospital's main entrance, a helicopter circled, life flight inbound, probably, and she watched it bank toward the landing pad without slowing her stride. 3 years of working Seattle General had taught her that other people's emergencies rarely intersected with her own. She'd learned to exist in the spaces between crises, to be the presence people called for and then forgot they'd seen. By 6 in the morning, she understood that forgetting had ended. Patricia Hoffman's office occupied the northeast corner of the third-floor administrative wing, overlooking the pediatric unit where Hannah had spent the last 36 hours walking a careful line between competence and invisibility. Patricia was the unit manager, a woman with kind eyes that had learned to look away, and when Hannah entered at 6:11 a.m., she noticed immediately that the folder on Patricia's desk was already open, already marked with tabs and handwritten notes in a script Hannah recognized as belonging to Dr. Pierce. "Sit down, Hannah." Not a request. Not even particularly unkind. Just the tone of someone delivering news that tasted like regret. The folder's tab read, Scope of Practice Inquiry, Clarke, H. "We've received a formal complaint," Patricia continued, sliding the folder forward without looking up. "Dr. Pierce has initiated an investigation into your clinical assessments and your patient interactions. Specifically, his documented instances where you made medical recommendations beyond your scope as a nurse." Hannah's hands rested flat on her thighs. Her voice came out measured, as it always did when institutions tried to explain why they decided to protect themselves instead of patients. The Rodriguez boys' lung sounds. Among other observations, yes. Patricia's fingers moved to her keyboard. The hospital has activated a standard review process. "We've contacted your previous employers, all 3 of them, and we're bringing in an outside clinical consultant to review your charts from the last 2 years. 3 employers. Hannah had worked at 3 facilities in her 8 years since civilian life, each one a place she'd learned something new before moving on. St. Luke's in San Diego for 12 months. Mercy General in Chicago for 19 months. And now Seattle General, pushing 20 months when she'd thought she had more time to disappear completely into the work before another transfer became necessary. "The consultant arrives this afternoon," Patricia said. "Her name is Dr. Margot Ellison. She's reviewed hospital protocols for the American Nursing Board. She's very thorough." "What's the timeline?" "Initial assessment, 48 hours. Then the board makes a determination." Patricia's eyes finally lifted to meet Hannah's. "Hannah, I want to be honest with you. Dr. Pierce has made some significant calls. Board members. His network is extensive. The way he's framed this, it's not just about 1 or 2 assessments. He's suggesting there's a pattern. A pattern of someone who doesn't understand the difference between nursing and practicing medicine." The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a frequency that made Hannah's molars ache. She'd learned in the field hospital's outside cubble that most people couldn't hear that sound. They'd adapted to it immediately. Captain Hannah Clarke had never had the luxury of adaptation. She heard everything. There's more, Patricia said, and handed across a printed sheet, the new assignment roster for the pediatric floor. Hannah Clarke's name appeared at the bottom, post-surgical recovery unit, 3rd floor, effective immediately. The PSIU was 2 floors away from the pediatric critical care wing. 2 floors away from room 347. 2 floors away from a child whose chest was already beginning to rise and fall in patterns that worried experienced eyes, whose oxygen saturation crept down each shift like a slow tide pulling away from shore. It's not a suspension, Patricia said quickly, as if the distinction mattered. You'll be working, maintaining your certifications. But Dr. Pierce felt, and I've agreed based on his documentation, that it would be appropriate to relocate you temporarily while the investigation proceeds. It's protective, Hannah. For you. For the hospital. Hannah took the reassignment sheet. The paper felt thin in her hands, the kind of thin that let light pass through if you held it up to the sun. Everything institutional was thin if you pressed hard enough. How long is temporary? Hannah asked. We'll see how the investigation develops. A week? 2 weeks. Patricia's hands moved nervously across her desk. The consultant may determine this is all a misunderstanding. They both knew that wasn't how consultant reviews worked. They both knew Patricia had already made her choice, that Hannah had been useful until she'd become complicated, and complicated people got moved to the margins until they either stopped making trouble or disappeared entirely. I understand, Hannah said. She stood, her badge catching the morning light as it swung from her lanyard. The ID photo was 3 years old. She looked almost the same in it, which meant she looked like the same person she'd been before the assignment in the Hindu Kush, before the extraction, before she'd learned that you could save someone's life and spend the next 18 years with their name stitched into your muscle memory like scar tissue. Hannah, one more thing. Patricia's voice stopped her at the door. Whatever Dr. Pierce is looking for, if there's something in your background that... There's nothing, Hannah said. It was technically accurate. There was nothing that could be found by 3 references from civilian hospitals and a nursing license that had been issued to someone who'd appeared in the system fully formed, as if she'd never been anyone else before that moment. The PSIU occupied the entire northeast wing of the 3rd floor, separated from the pediatric ICU by 2 sets of double doors, a connecting corridor, and an administrative buffer zone that ensured Hannah would never accidentally stumble into the space where Tyler Webb lay sleeping. The assignment was genius in its efficiency. It appeared to be protecting Hannah from further scrutiny. What it actually did was prevent her from accessing the patient she was most concerned about, the one whose clinical trajectory was beginning to worry her in ways that transcended professional obligation. Hannah picked up her new assignment tablet at 10:15 a.m. 3 post-surgical patients, all stable. Routine wound checks. Medication administration every 4 hours. The kind of work that required consciousness and competence, but not the kind of clinical intuition that had caused Dr. Pierce so much distress. She spent 30 minutes familiarizing herself with the PSIU protocol, then made a routing decision that took her past the pediatric unit during her break. The corridor was quiet, the morning bustle settled into routine efficiency. Through the open door of room 347, Hannah could see that a young nurse, someone named Jessica, maybe 2 years out of school, had replaced her in Tyler Webb's rotation. Jessica was efficient. She took his vitals, charted them without obvious concern, adjusted the fall line with practiced hands. But Jessica didn't sit. Didn't listen. Didn't hear the subtle change in his breathing pattern that suggested his right lower lung field was becoming less compliant, that his intercostal muscles were working harder than they should be at rest. At noon, Pierce found her in the medication room. The door clicked closed behind him with the kind of soft, deliberate sound that suggested he'd been waiting for the timing to be empty. The room was small, narrow shelves, refrigerated storage, the kind of space where 2 people's proximity became claustrophobic in roughly 3 seconds. I want you to understand something, Clarke. His voice was low, positioned so that the words wouldn't travel past the threshold. I've made calls. To the board. To your references, though there aren't many, are there? 3 employers in 8 years. It's like you barely existed before Seattle General. That's fascinating to me. Hannah arranged vials in the medication cart with mechanical precision. Her hands moved through the familiar sequence without needing direction from her conscious mind. This was the thing about institutional bullying, it always followed the same script. The threat came first, dressed in reason. The power demonstration. The implicit promise of escalation. Whatever you're hiding, I'm going to find it. He was close enough now that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and predatory. When I do, you won't just lose your job. You'll lose your license. You'll lose everything. Hannah turned to face him. Her eyes met his with the kind of absolute stillness that suggested she was looking through him rather than at him, the way soldiers learn to look through threats to whatever objective lay beyond them. Are you finished, Doctor? His smile was the smile of someone who'd never encountered resistance that didn't immediately break. Not even close. He left. The door sealed behind him with that same soft sound, and Hannah finished arranging the medications in a silence so complete she could hear the ventilation system pushing filtered air through the hospital's mechanical lungs. That evening, at 8:17 p.m., Hannah violated her reassignment. She'd been assigned to the 3rd floor. The pediatric unit occupied the 4th. The stairwell was empty, the hallway between units quiet with the particular exhaustion of early night shift, when families had gone home and the hospital had temporarily forgotten how to scream. Room 347's door stood partially open. Through the gap, Hannah could see Colonel Marcus Webb drowsing in the bedside chair, his jacket draped across the back. The faded green beret unit patch was visible through the lining seam. She could see the stitching, careful and deliberate, the kind of repair work done by hands that knew how to maintain important things. Beside the chair, Tyler Webb slept with the particular fragility of a child whose body was beginning to betray him in ways he couldn't yet understand. Hannah stepped inside. His oxygen saturation read 94% on the monitor, which was acceptable until you understood the trajectory. His respiratory rate was 32, too high for rest, too rapid for comfort. His intercostal muscles were retracting slightly with each inhalation, his body working too hard to move air that should have moved easily. Tension pneumothorax was a clinical possibility that lived in the space between what was observable and what was imminent. Hannah's hands moved across his chest with the absolute gentleness that came from training her muscle memory to distinguish between assessment and damage. Lung sounds diminished on the right side. Developing cyanosis around his lips, faint but present. She documented nothing. She paged the on-call resident using Tyler Webb's room phone. Room 347 needs evaluation now. Respiratory status declining. The resident answered with the particular irritation of someone being pulled from rest. I'll come within the hour. It won't be fast enough, Hannah thought. But she was a reassigned nurse on borrowed time, and a second disciplinary report would finish what Dr. Pierce had started. She returned to the stairwell, descended one flight, walked the long corridor back to the post-surgical recovery unit, and spent the next 4 hours monitoring her 3 stable patients with the kind of mechanical competence that required no intuition at all. At midnight, Hannah sat in her apartment with the lights off, staring at the darkness above her kitchen table, waiting for a phone call that never came. The code alarm screams at 2:17 a.m. Hannah is 3 floors above, in post-surgical recovery, monitoring a girl recovering from a spinal fusion. The girl is stable. Sleeping. The monitors beat their steady rhythm, something almost musical in the darkness of the unit. Then the overhead speaker crackles. Code blue. Pediatric ICU. Room 347. Hannah's hands go still. Room 347. Tyler Webb. She doesn't think. Her legs move first, muscle memory taking over like it always does. The stairwell door is 40 feet away. She covers the distance in 9 seconds, takes the stairs down 2 at a time, her rubber-soled shoes barely whispering against the concrete. Her badge swings on its lanyard. Her breath comes steady and controlled, not panicked, never panicked. This is the part she was trained for. This is the part where noise goes away. The pediatric ICU corridor stretches before her, fluorescent lights turning the walls a sickly institutional white. She can hear the code team mobilizing. Someone shouting for the crash cart. A nurse calling out medications. But underneath it all, something else, the sound of a child gasping. The wet, desperate gasp of a kid who can't breathe. Hannah pushes through room 347's door. Dr. Kevin Marsh stands frozen at Tyler's bedside. Second-year resident. 27, maybe 28. His hands are trembling. His face has gone the color of old concrete. Tyler Webb lies in the bed, his small chest heaving, his oxygen saturation plummeting on the monitor. 90%. 85. 80. His skin is turning gray at the edges. His lips going dusky. He was fine, Marsh stammers. He was sleeping, and then his breathing changed, and I checked on him, Anne. Hannah doesn't listen to the words. She's already assessing. She moves to the bedside with the kind of quiet precision that belongs to someone who has done this in worse places. Her fingers find Tyler's ribs. Absent breath sounds on the right side. She can feel it, the absence of air moving. Her hand slides to his neck. Tracheal deviation. Shifting toward the left. The jugular veins distended, standing out like ropes beneath the skin. Tension pneumothorax. The boy's right lung has collapsed. Air is building in his chest cavity, pushing everything to the left, crushing his heart. Every breath he takes makes it worse. He's running out of time. I need a 14-gauge angiocath needle. Now, Hannah says. Her voice doesn't match the panic in the room. It comes out flat. Certain. A surgical nurse, newer, maybe 6 months in, hands her the needle without question. Without hesitation. Because something about Hannah's voice makes people comply without understanding why. Hannah counts ribs with her fingers. 1. 2. The second intercostal space. Midclavicular line. She can feel Tyler's heartbeat underneath her hand, fast, desperate, the rhythm of a child's body in crisis. His eyes are open, terrified, and she meets them for a fraction of a second. I've got you, she says, and the boy goes still. The needle goes in smooth. No hesitation. No fumbling. Just precision, the kind that comes from having done this in a field hospital in Cunha province with mortars falling a mile away and a captain bleeding out on a stretcher beside her. The hiss. The release of air is immediate. Audible. It comes out like a small scream, the sound of pressure equalizing, of a collapsed lung system beginning to breathe again. Tyler gasps. His color starts returning. Oxygen saturation climbs, 85%. 88. 90. 92. The monitor settles into a steadier rhythm. The code team arrives 30 seconds later, thundering into the room like a cavalry unit. The attending physician, Dr. Sarah Chen, takes one look at the situation and nods to Hannah. Good catch. Good work. We've got him from here. Hannah steps back. She's already documenting in her mind the time, the procedure, the response. But her hands remain steady. Her breathing remains controlled. The trembling that should be there, the adrenaline crash that should be coming, stays locked inside her chest where no one can see it. Colonel Marcus Webb appears in the doorway. He had run from the room when the code was called. Now he stands at the threshold, watching his son breathe, watching the monitors show normal oxygen saturation, watching his boy's chest rise and fall in the rhythm of a child who will live through the night. He looks at Hannah. She doesn't meet his eyes. She simply finishes her documentation, her face professionally blank, and steps aside to let the attending physician work. But she sees his face. She sees the moment it happens, the moment a father recognizes that someone just saved his child's life. And she turns away before he can thank her, before he can say anything that might break the protocol, before he can expose the rules she just violated by being here at all. Dr. Pierce appears at 3:45 a.m. He's been summoned from home. He's still wearing his personal clothes, dark slacks, a button-down shirt. His hair is slightly disheveled, and his eyes are moving like a predator that has caught the scent of blood in the water. Hannah is still in the hallway outside room 347, completing her documentation on the portable computer. She's not supposed to be here. She's on reassignment. 3rd floor. Restricted from critical care. Everyone knows it. Pierce takes Colonel Webb aside. Hannah can only hear fragments, but the tone tells her everything. Extraordinarily concerned, unauthorized procedure, well outside her scope of practice as a nurse, we take these breaches incredibly seriously. Colonel, a full investigation. Marcus's voice comes lower. She can't hear the words. Pierce's response is louder. Designed to be heard. Protocol exists for a reason, sir. We cannot have nursing staff making clinical decisions that belong to physicians, regardless of the outcome. Hannah closes the computer. She turns and walks down the hallway. Not quickly. Not in response to being observed. Just moving, like she has business elsewhere. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead, a sound like insects drowning in a jar. By 7 a.m., she's been called into Administrator Yeager's office. Patricia is there. Looking tired. Looking like she's been waiting for this moment since the investigation was filed. Hannah, I'm so sorry, Yeager says. We have no choice. You performed a procedure that's clearly outside nursing scope. Regardless of the outcome. I understand, Hannah says. You're suspended, effective immediately. Pending a full investigation. We'll contact you within 2 weeks about the status of your employment. Hannah nods. She's already standing. She's already moving toward the door. Hannah, Patricia begins. But Hannah is already gone. She empties her locker in silence. Her scrubs. Her spare shoes. The trauma shears she's carried for 8 years. A photo of Emma, taken last Halloween. Her nursing license in its plastic holder. Everything that identifies her as someone who works here goes into a canvas bag. She doesn't look at anyone. No one looks at her. The nurse's station has already rearranged itself around her absence. It's a skill hospitals develop, this ability to erasure. At 3 p.m., Hannah sits at her kitchen table. She's still wearing her scrubs. She hasn't changed. She hasn't showered. She's been sitting here for 8 hours, staring at the space above the table, at the nothing in front of her, while the afternoon light moves across the kitchen counter in slow, incremental shifts. Emma comes home from school at 3:17 p.m. She finds her mother exactly as described, still in scrubs, still at the table, still staring at nothing. Emma is 8 years old. She's learned to read her mother's silences the way children learn to read weather, by watching for the signs that a storm is coming. Mommy? Why are you home? Hannah cannot answer. The words are there, somewhere, but they're locked away in the same place where she keeps the screaming. She pulls Emma close and holds on like she's drowning, like this small child is the only piece of flotsam left in a sea that's trying to pull her under. Emma doesn't understand what's happening. But she wraps her arms around her mother's neck anyway, the way children do, offering comfort to something broken without needing to understand the break. They stay like that. Mother and daughter. The light moves across the counter. The world continues without them. 3 floors above, at Seattle General, the standard security clearance renewal processes through the federal database. An analyst named Jennifer Torres works the night shift in the Clearance Processing Center in Arlington. It's dull work, methodical work, the kind that requires attention but not inspiration. She opens Hannah Clarke's file. Routine nursing license verification. Background check. No criminal record. No debts. No red flags. And then she sees it. A notation she's never encountered in 12 years of processing medical clearances, classification level Umbra, do not query without Sapphire authorization. Jennifer's training kicks in immediately. She flags it. The system sends automated alerts to 3 agencies, Defense Intelligence Agency, FBI Counterintelligence Division, and JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command. Within 72 hours, everything changes. The system flagged it at 3:41 a.m. A classified notation buried 6 layers deep in Seattle General's administrative server, flagged by algorithms that hadn't been activated in 14 years. 3 separate government agencies received alerts simultaneously. Joint Special Operations Command, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the Pentagon's Counterintelligence Division. Within 6 hours, Colonel Marcus Webb stood in Administrator Ellen Cho's office, holding something he'd carried for 15 years like a prayer folded into his jacket lining. A faded green beret unit patch, the stitching worn soft from his fingers tracing it in the dark, in hospital waiting rooms, in the moment he thought he'd die in the Hindu Kush. His hands trembled as he held it up. Not from fear. From recognition. From the weight of a name he'd called into the darkness on a night that wasn't supposed to end with him walking out alive. Angel 6, he whispered. That was her call sign. That was the voice that came through his radio when everything was burning and the LZs were hot and his squad was pinned. He'd never seen her face. Not in the compound. Not in the extraction. Not in the years after. But her name was carved into his forearm in black ink, along with the date, Operation Silent Shepherd. June 14, 2009. The night Captain Hannah Clarke carried him out of a firefight that would be officially scrubbed from every record that existed. A Marine lieutenant in dress blue stood beside him, holding a document with the presidential seal embossed at the top. He read carefully, each word measured, for extraordinary valor under fire. For actions in direct support of Task Force 121 operations. For the extraction and medical stabilization of wounded personnel under sustained enemy fire. The decoration is awarded in recognition of Captain Hannah Marie Clarke. The lieutenant's voice was steady, but his eyes were wet. He'd read similar citations before. Never to a woman hiding under a hospital ID badge in Atlanta. Then Dr. Pierce's voice cut through the moment like a scalpel. He'd been standing at the back of the office, arms crossed, his face arranged in an expression of practiced skepticism. "This is fabricated," he said flatly. "I've already contacted the Pentagon directly. I have confirmation from 3 separate departments that these records are classified cover stories. Operational security theater. That woman is not a military officer. She's a nurse with delusions of..." "Sit down, Dr. Pierce," Administrator Cho said quietly. She had the look of someone who'd already made decisions before this meeting began. "Your security clearance has been suspended pending investigation. You've accessed restricted databases using credentials that weren't issued to you. You've fabricated timestamps in personnel files. You're not speaking until your attorney is present." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that comes before impact. Pierce's jaw tightened. He'd spent his career building leverage, collecting favors, positioning himself as untouchable. The golfing partners. The board members. The consultants he hired to validate his narrative. All of it was evaporating in real time as 3 FBI agents walked through the door, their suits and their federal badges and their names creating an atmosphere of institutional weight that even Pierce's years of maneuvering couldn't deflect. They read him his rights outside the hospital in the parking lot, where the morning sun was harsh and unforgiving, where security cameras had caught everything, where the same nurses who'd once gathered around him to listen to his opinions were watching through window glass as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. His medical license would be suspended by morning, not revoked yet. That would take a trial, but suspended, which meant his name would be publicly associated with criminal charges, unauthorized access, document tampering, harassment, retaliation. The outside consultant he'd hired, Dr. Gerald Morris, had already released a statement disavowing him. The board member he'd called for favors, Randall Hutchins, had already testified that Pierce asked him to pressure administration to terminate a problematic nurse, and that Hutchins had refused. Pierce had miscalculated his own invulnerability. He'd assumed his competence would protect him. It hadn't. Competence means nothing when you're caught. Hannah watched from the pediatric ward, through the window of room 342, as they led him past. She didn't look satisfied. She didn't smile. Her expression didn't change. That was the only kind of victory that mattered to her, one that required nothing from her but her presence, her testimony, her medical expertise, the record of her work. Pierce had made the mistake of trying to erase someone who'd already been trained to disappear. The difference was, Hannah Clarke disappeared intentionally. Pierce was being erased by the system he believed he controlled. A woman found her that afternoon. Colonel Sarah Voss, Pentagon liaison, moving through the hospital like someone who'd cleared her path with a single phone call. They met in the staff lounge on the 4th floor, where the coffee tasted like it had been brewing since morning and the fluorescent lights hummed their endless mechanical prayer. Voss sat down across from Hannah without preamble. "Captain Clarke, your cover is compromised. We can't put that back in the bottle." Voss's voice was steady, administrative, carrying the weight of institutional machinery. "But your service is now officially recognized. Back pay for the years you served under classification. Full veterans benefits. Honorable discharge notation on your record. You're cleared to discuss Operation Silent Shepherd with immediate family only. No media. No interviews." Hannah stared at her coffee. It had gone cold. "I didn't want recognition," she said quietly. "I wanted to do my job." "You did," Voss replied. "You did it twice, once in combat, once in a hospital. Both times under fire." She stood to leave, then paused. "Colonel Webb wanted me to tell you something. He said he called for Angel 6 in the dark and you came. He said his son called for help and you came again. He said you don't get to be invisible anymore." The word settled into Hannah like a stone dropping into still water. She'd spent 15 years being invisible. Being invisible was the entire point. Being invisible meant Tyler Webb was alive. Being invisible meant Colonel Webb got to watch his son take his first steps. Being invisible was the only thing that mattered. Except now it wasn't anymore. Pierce received a visitor in his jail cell, his attorney, a woman named Catherine Mills who'd handled 3 previous complaints against him and walked them all to settlement. This time there would be no settlement. The FBI had evidence. Stolen credentials. Forged documents. Deliberate interference with patient care. The strongest charge was accessing the Pentagon's classified personnel database using credentials that belonged to an administrator who'd been dead for 2 years. Pierce had purchased them on the dark web for $3,200. Catherine explained his options: plead guilty to the unauthorized computer access, misdemeanor charge, 6 months community service, permanent revocation of his medical license. The alternative was trial and conviction on multiple felonies. 20 years in federal prison. The choice was simple. Pierce took the deal. The judge who sentenced him wasn't impressed by his cooperation. Judge Patricia Hernandez had been reading medicine for 30 years, her sister was an ER physician, her brother-in-law a surgeon. She understood what Pierce had done. He'd weaponized his credentials against a nurse with more integrity than he could comprehend. He'd tried to destroy a woman to protect his ego. The gavel came down like a punctuation mark ending a sentence nobody wanted to read. 6 months community service. Permanent license revocation. $47,000 restitution to Seattle General for the cost of the investigation. And the question from Judge Hernandez, asked into the silence, "Is there anything you'd like to say, Dr. Pierce?" He said nothing. His mouth opened. His mouth closed. The words he wanted, explanations, justifications, assertions of his own value, all of them seemed ridiculous in the face of what he'd become. A man with no license, no job, no credibility, no leverage. A man who discovered too late that institutions have longer memories than individuals, that competence doesn't matter if the foundation beneath you is rotting, that you can be very smart and still be fundamentally wrong about what kind of person you are. 3 weeks later, Hannah returned to Seattle General. Not as a staff nurse, as a clinical consultant for the pediatric critical care unit, a position created specifically for her, with autonomy Pierce had spent his entire career guarding jealously. The corridors were the same. The equipment was the same. The fluorescent lights hummed the same mechanical rhythm. But the way people moved around her had changed. Nurses greeted her by name. Residents asked her opinion without hesitation. She was visible now, whether she wanted it or not, and that visibility carried weight like a captain's insignia, like a military rank she'd never been allowed to claim, until now. In room 347, Tyler Webb was out of his wheelchair for the first time since the needle decompression. The tension pneumothorax had been catastrophic, but its resolution had revealed an underlying diaphragmatic issue that once corrected accelerated his recovery beyond anyone's expectations. He moved between parallel bars with his father on one side and Hannah on the other, his legs remembering how to hold weight, his lungs remembering how to expand without resistance. Colonel Marcus Webb's eyes met Hannah's across his son's small shoulders. "I looked at your face every day for 3 weeks and didn't recognize you," he said quietly. "How is that possible?" Hannah's smile was slight, tired. "I wasn't trying to be recognized, Colonel. I was trying to be invisible." Marcus touched the tattoo on his forearm, Angel 6, the date, the coordinates of the LZ where everything changed. "You don't get to be invisible anymore." He said it not as a request but as an order. As something official. As something that mattered. Tyler took another step. Then another. Outside, through the window of room 347, a medical supply van idled in the parking lot. Dr. Pierce loaded boxes into the back, diabetic testing supplies, wound care kits, saline solutions for clinics that served the populations he'd spent his career looking down on. He wore jeans and a t-shirt, no white coat, no authority. His community service would continue for 6 months, 5 days a week, 6 hours daily. He glanced up at the hospital building once, his face hollow and still, then returned to his work. Nobody watched him. Nobody acknowledged him. He was invisible now too. The difference was he'd never chosen it. Hannah turned back to Tyler. The boy reached the end of the parallel bars and laughed, a pure, delighted sound that filled the room the way fear had once filled it. His father lifted him in a fierce hug, and Hannah stepped back, letting them have that moment without her. Patricia approached, the unit manager, her face carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who'd realized her mistakes too late to prevent them. "The reporters are still asking for interviews," Patricia said quietly. "No interviews," Hannah replied. "Just patients who need care." Patricia nodded, then hesitated. "Hannah, I should have listened to you. About the Rodriguez boy. About Tyler. About everything." Hannah's expression softened fractionally. The kind of forgiveness that comes from knowing you'd do the same thing in her position. "You're listening now. That's what matters." She left at the end of her shift, Emma waiting in the pickup lane at school, her daughter climbing into the car with a drawing showing a nurse with a cape. "Mrs. Peterson said you're a hero, Mommy." Hannah buckled her seatbelt and started the car. "I'm just a nurse, baby." Emma considered this with 6-year-old wisdom. "Mrs. Peterson says that's the same thing." Hannah drove home through Atlanta traffic, past the city where she'd tried to disappear, where she'd attempted to build a life separate from what she'd been, what she'd done, who she was. The quiet nurses are often the strongest. The invisible ones are usually holding everything together. Sometimes you can carry someone through a firefight and their gratitude becomes a tattoo on their forearm. Sometimes you save a child at 2 a.m. and the child's father becomes the thing that finally brings you back to the light. The quietest person in the room might be holding it all together. And sometimes, that person gets to choose whether to stay quiet anymore. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated or overlooked, please subscribe, like, and tell us in the comments, what would you do if your Secret Service was finally recognized?